We'll kick it off. So first and foremost, I'd like to thank all of our sponsors who play a vital role in supporting TMA and help us to provide these programming opportunities. Let me start with some introductions. So I'm proud to present to you a very experienced panelist group today. I'm Mike Boudreau. I'll moderate. I'm a director with MorrisAnderson. MorrisAnderson, the firm, is focused on middle market corporate restructuring, insolvency, and bankruptcy matters for the past 35 years. And with us today is Dan Dooley. Dan's the principal and CEO of MorrisAnderson. He's based in Chicago. Dan has a strong national reputation in crisis management, restructuring and transactional situations, operations improvement, debt refinancings, and other adjustments required to the capital stack. Kress. Kay is a partner with Troutman Pepper and has extensive experience restructuring debt and representing secured creditors in federal receivership actions. Kay has also represented debtors, secured creditors, creditor committees, and trustees in out-of-court workouts, as well as numerous bankruptcy situations. Kay co-authored Chapter 83 Creditor Committees for Collier's Bankruptcy Practice Guide, as well as authored numerous other articles for the ABA, the Michigan Business Law, and other publications. Colin McClary is a managing director at MorrisAnderson. Colin brings valuable financing, restructuring, and private equity experience, having worked in special assets, debt private placement, and corporate banking at Bank of America and Z Capital Partners, a $2 billion private equity fund. And last but not least, Duncan Bourne. Duncan has been with WynnChurch since 2003. Duncan has 35 years of experience in turnarounds, financial restructuring, performance improvement, and investing in special situations. Prior to WynnChurch, Duncan was with E&Y, Alex Partners, and a partner with BDO Seidman. Interestingly, Duncan began his career as a chemical engineer. So let's kick off our discussion regarding restructuring in the restaurant industry. So the restaurant business has tight margins, rising minimum wages, high labor turnover, and fierce competition. Many restaurant groups have too many non-viable locations, too much square footage, and not enough technological investment. However, great obstacles often provide great opportunity. And given that we are in March Madness, I'll quote the late great basketball coach John Wooden, and that failure is not fatal, but failing to change might be. So as an overview for the presentation today, on our second slide, Amanda, we'll take a look at an industry, a snapshot of the industry. We'll look at trends pre-COVID, trends during COVID, and then look at post-COVID in the short run, 1 to 2 years, and then 3 to 5 years thereafter. And we'll also look at complexities and the pitfalls of restaurant restructurings and workouts. So as a snapshot for the industry on slide 3, I think the takeaway is that in 2020, it was estimated that industry sales would approach at $1 trillion. It's a huge sector of the economy. It's an important industry to lenders. They'll either want to be involved or miss out on the opportunities. All the stats on this page are brought to you by the National Restaurant Association. There's 1 million restaurant locations in the United States, 15 million industry employees. And interestingly, the number of middle-class jobs as defined in the range of 45 to 75,000 in the industry grew 84% between 2010 and 2018, more than 3 times faster than the overall economy. Looking at the trends pre-COVID, I'll turn that over to Colin.
Hey, thanks, Mike. MorrisAnderson, and I'm sure at other turnaround firms, restaurants have always kind of been a industry that would always provide engagements to do turnaround activities, and particularly the years 17, 18, and 19, restaurants still had some headwinds they were facing, particularly, minimum wages were rising, across the country. And that was pressuring margins at the restaurants. A lot of the bigger chains just got bigger, more well capitalized. They were able to invest in technology where some of the smaller chains and the mom and pops were not. Many of the restaurants were building locations that were just too large. The square footages were just not well utilized. And then you also started, it's always kind of been there, but it's really taken off in the last, even before COVID, the last between 16 to 19 is millennials, as everybody likes to talk about, they were being more comfortable ordering online through mobile order apps and having it delivered to them. And the delivery companies at the start were charging about 30% of the ticket as a delivery fee. And now that started to come down. And I think Duncan could probably talk a little bit about this too, where, we're starting to see commonly 25% and maybe even getting down into the high teens, but it still was pressuring the restaurant chains to on margins, but they also didn't want to give up that business, even though it may not have been very profitable. They felt like they had to continue to do the delivery business in order to try to get the millennials to come into the store. So those are some of the trends that we've seen at MorrisAnderson.
Duncan, do you have any comments on that?
No, I agree with that. I think competition is a huge issue in the restaurant business, and third-party delivery essentially added a whole number of competitors. If you think about it, you're a restaurant, you're in a little local area. All of a sudden, you're being confronted with competition from outside of your geography from third-party delivery, and the amount of choice that's then available through third-party through the various providers is many times the choice that was available prior to the advent of third-party delivery. So that has not only expanded the delivery universe that these folks had to compete with locally, but it expanded essentially a virtual local competition. And so that's a big reason why these restaurants found themselves with too much square feet. People weren't dining in so much, and they weren't having as much demand from the competition as they had before. So it's a big deal to restaurants. COVID's changing or accelerating that even more as we're sitting here.
So let me chip in and add a couple comments for whatever it's worth. The first thing is, when we talk about restaurants, it's not a generic group. There's all sorts of different categories within the restaurant industry, from what people used to call fast food, now we call quick serve, but McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, etc., to the casual dining, the people where it's relatively inexpensive sit down, Applebee's, Fridays, that sort of venue, to family dining, which is heavy breakfast, heavy lunch, not so much dinner. Think maybe Perkins, stuff like that. And then you go to the fine dining category. Of course, I've skipped over what's called fast casual. Think Chipotle. It's kind of a hybrid between casual and quick serve, if you will. So there's all sorts of categories, and the grouping that's really been hurt so badly in COVID is what I would call any restaurant that has a sit-down capability, which everyone has a sit-down capability, but quick serve, 75 or 65 to 70% of quick serve business has always been, or not always, but recently has been takeout and delivery, takeout and a drive-through, if you will. That's before COVID. It's even higher now, obviously. So they've been hurt the least, and fast casual the second least. The second thing that I'd like to point out is, at least in our experience, we've worked with, I think, 13 different restaurant groups in the last 3 years, maybe 4, is that almost all restaurant, if there's a group of restaurants, 30, 40, 100, 200, almost all of them have too many stores. There's stores they should close that are losers, and that there's a difficulty in closing stores. And it usually revolves, if you're a franchisee, around negotiating with your franchisor, because you have a contract with them. And that contract is a date of termination. And the franchisors don't like you to close the stores, because even if you're losing money, they're still taxing the stores with royalty as well as marketing dollars, typically taking out roughly 4% on each depends on the franchise. And the second thing is you got to get out leases. And it's not like if you want to shut 10 or 20 stores, you go to one person and negotiate. Usually you got 10 or 20 lessors. And so it's a hell of a difficult discussion relative to that. Let's move to the next page. Colin, I think we start with you. Or maybe we start with Duncan, I'm sorry.
Yep.
Well, I guess so during COVID, what COVID has caused is an acceleration in a lot of the trends that were occurring pre-COVID. We talked about third-party delivery. Clearly, third-party delivery is sort of taken over for some restaurants. Dan mentioned the restaurants with dine-in capability. Well, dine-in for a lot of restaurants is virtually eliminated. Even here in Chicago, where I live, you're still facing significant restrictions, and the spacing requirements and the cleanliness requirements and the contact tracing requirements and things like that are really expensive. They cost labor, and already in a very competitive business, when you're adding that much cost, makes dine-in, if you were able to reopen it, if the regulation allowed you to, it makes it too expensive to actually reopen in some cases. So what's occurred is well-capitalized restaurants, restaurant chains, restaurant owners have been able to survive better. They're better situated capital-wise. They could withstand the blow. And then also, people, said, okay, I need to go more touchless. So drive-through is something that's, you've even watched McDonald's change the way they touch the food, how they hand it to you, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Drive up, curbside, where the worker comes out and hands you the stuff in your trunk or in your car, doesn't even touch you, or you don't touch the package when they hand it off to you. So there's been a tremendous amount of change there and how customers interact with the restaurant. We had in the restaurants that we operate, we've had to make very sure that every guest felt very safe transacting, no contact, carry out and delivery, so that they would come, so that they'd feel safe. And then they also had to have a quality experience, enjoying the food, had to be hot, fresh, etc. And so that they would come back again and again and again. And then, the networks that everybody has, these individuals that had positive experiences, they would tell their friends that they had a safe, quality experience. And then that would, help us expand our market share that way. So very important that people were confident in their interaction with restaurants. So, that first bullet there, only the well-capitalized and drive-throughs windows survive. Yeah, but it's sort of shorthand to a lot of things that have taken place in restaurant operations during COVID.
I'll add a couple things, Duncan. There's certainly been, as you look at the chart on the right on this slide, a large number of restaurant filings in the year 2020. I don't know how many that is, but it's a large number of filings, mostly casual, family dining, and some quick serve, and obviously a few upper end restaurants as well. But Chapter 11 in the restaurant industry is almost always used to do a sale. And there's been, at least in the last year and a half, a large number of credit-based sales where the lender actually has taken over these companies. Now, that doesn't mean that the major banks are in the restaurant business all of a sudden. What typically has happened in many of these is that hedge funds have bought out bank positions, if you will, and use that to credit bid and take over the restaurant. I know Fortress has done that 2, 3, 4 times over the last year on a number of deals. Chapter 7, liquidation, Colin will talk about in a little bit. Very, very few of those, and quite a few out-of-court restructurings, because especially in this era where you can kind of get rent concessions, at least short-term, by and large, many of these deals are a lender-debtor dispute. So it's a fairly constrained dispute between two parties, and debt restructuring is perfect for that. And if you have a limited number of parties, there's not a lot of reason to go to bankruptcy. Last thing I'll add on this slide is that if you look at the chart in the middle of the page, which kind of shows total eating and drinking place sales, and you see the one dip in the March, April, May timeframe, and if the chart had data out in December, January, February, you see a similar wave there where things got killed, restaurant sales got killed. What was really going on there was not necessarily directly COVID. What was going on was the government reaction to COVID. So in certain states, restaurant sales have been decimated, California being the most obvious. I know Colin and I are in a deal where the guys have restaurants in 4 states, California, Oregon, Illinois, and Indiana. And 3 of those 4 states, California, Oregon, and Illinois, they've had 2 to 3 waves of COVID and sucking wind because the restaurant is forced shut down or put severe restrictions, only could have 25, 50% dining capacity. Indiana's having a record year. Indiana's actually up in 2020 and 2021 because by and large, they put almost no restrictions on it all.
Well, plus every Illinoisan is crossing the border to go over there and eat, right? If they're close.
Yeah, it kind of reminds you when you were 18 years old and you wanted to drink in Wisconsin, right, Duncan?
Yeah, exactly.
All right, next page. Colin, I think you start there.
Yeah, so, the restaurant industry was probably the best beneficiary of the government programs. And I know everybody's heard about the Paycheck Protection Program in 2020. And then there's the second smaller Paycheck Protection Program in 2021. There's been employee tax credit programs that some of the restaurant chains could realize millions of dollars of tax refunds out of. We've, some of the restaurant chains that we've worked on, they've received $12 to $16 million of funds, and it was critical that they did that. Otherwise, they may have closed, and a lot of employees would have been out of work. But with those funds, they were able to, limp along. And now that the environment is loosening up and capacity restrictions are loosening up, they're starting to come back. But those programs have been key for a lot of these chains to survive. And there's a new program coming up that maybe Duncan, you can talk about, which is the Restaurant Revitalization Fund.
Well, that's a brand new program, and you can see the bullets on the page. It's certainly if you're eligible for it, and I think we're still waiting on the rules from the SBA on eligibility. If you're eligible for it, you should absolutely take advantage of it. It's got a limited amount of funding relative to the PPP, but it's still a substantial amount of cash there. Interestingly, you can still get up to $10 million grant, similar size to the PPP. Going back to the PPP, that was instrumental in saving many businesses, and particularly the restaurant business. When it took place, we were facing closure of our 2 chains. We had gone down from a pretty decent year, start of the year, and we were down 90% in some restaurants. People initially, if you recall, went out and went grocery shopping, and they sat at home and ate their groceries for the first month after the government shutdown. So there wasn't a heck of a lot of activity in the restaurant world. And then people woke up to the idea of home delivery and got used to it. But we were engaged in not paying rents. We were not paying taxes. We were not doing a lot of things just to stay alive. So PPP was a wonderful thing that happened. Of course, I think for the restructuring business, it hasn't been that great because I think it reduced the amount of restructurings and bankruptcies for the folks in the TMA. So I think PPP, the other programs that the government has come up with have been terrific. The only thing with the Restaurant Revitalization Fund for someone like me, probably no good, because what was great about PPP was that private equity firms could still get a PPP loan in restaurants and in franchises. And so that made that occur. But under the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, the SBA's affiliation rules will pretty much preclude a lot of private equity investors from taking advantage of it.
Colin or Duncan, if you recall when the PPP came out, I guess it was probably in May or June, there was a lot of confusion about whether private equity funds qualified for that. Remember that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I was living it every day. We were looking at the legislation before it got passed and hoping that we were going to be able to do it. And magically for a couple of our portfolio companies, it worked out. But by and large, for the rest of our businesses, we were shut out. And we could have used it in some of our other businesses for sure.
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks, guys. Let's turn the page to the next one. Trends post-COVID for in the short term over the next couple of years. Dan?
Sure. Well, the first thing I would point out, there obviously is a big gap between the strong and the weak, as there always is in any recession or any downturn. And certainly the COVID downturn has been severe as it affects the restaurant industries. And the point there is you really need a differentiated brand. The problem is so many people in the middle, in the casual and the family dining, there's not a lot of differentiation. Can somebody explain to me the difference between Wendy's and IHOP and all the family breakfast places? I'd be at a loss to explain that. What's the difference between Chili's and Fridays and Ruby Tuesdays? I have no idea, other than a name and some jingle they have. So clearly, one of the things that's happened is that many of the mom and pop restaurants, they've been just decimated by this because they obviously didn't have the capital to survive. And some of the ones that did pretty well, I mean, think of COVID kind of saved a lot of the pizza chains. Papa John's was on the ropes. As you recall, their founder got in all sorts of trouble, got kicked out of his own company. They brought in Shaquille O'Neal on the board and as a major investor, and he had got a lot of popularity. But all of a sudden now, when you're delivering everything, and you're a deliverer, as the pizza guys are, like, thank you, Lord. What a lucky thing to have happened to me. So, pizza, Chinese food, traditional foods that got delivered or picked up did well. Wings, which travels well, did well. Cold sandwiches, think Jimmy John's, did well. Hot sandwiches, not so much. I don't know if you've ever had the wonderful experience of ordering a burger and fries in a box and have it been delivered or show up, half an hour later. It ain't very appetizing, at least in my opinion. So there's certainly a lot of winners and losers. There's also the issue of many companies still are operating below break even, or at least below their fixed charges being primarily debt service and any CapEx, because the restaurants do require at least maintenance CapEx. And most franchisee restaurant agreements have development agreements with their franchisor, meaning that they'll refurb the restaurants every 10 or 15 years, and they'll build certain number of restaurants over a 5-year or 10-year period. So a lot of times you got a restaurant that's just not cash flowing, and the owners are hesitant to put money in because by any measure, if you look at trailing EBITDA, they're underwater. So they're kind of playing for the longer day, and they're going to the lenders and say, hey, lender, can you defer a bunch of payments? And clearly post, in the second quarter of 2020, almost every lender deferred any payment that was asked for 3 months and maybe longer. But you got to be able to figure out how to fund losses, or at least how to fund deficiencies. Colin will talk about deferred maintenance, but those are some comments I have. Colin, Duncan?
I'd say, as far as deferred expenses, when we got engaged by several chains, when COVID started, our advice to these companies in April, May, and June 2020 was, don't pay anything. You got to conserve cash except for employees. And so a lot of chains for a couple of months were only paying employees. They're not paying rent. They weren't paying their food vendors very fast. They were still paying them, but there was a lot very slow. Other vendors, they just weren't paying. And so now I think in 2021 and 22, a lot of the restaurant chains are going to be catching up. A lot of these vendors, landlords, or kind of striking deals of getting a discount on the past due payments, or restructuring the leases for a lower lease rate, but maybe extending the term. So you're going to see a lot of that activity this year and next year, likely. Definitely, because banks, non-banks, and private equity firms, a lot of them saw some losses in their portfolio. So, the availability of debt and equity for this sector is going to be tight, and the analysis and rigor is going to be very tough for new financings, new capital to come into this market. And the other thing to note too is you'll see the graph on the right about the locations that are being permanently closed. Aaron Allen and Associates is a fairly well-known restaurant industry consulting firm, and they're estimating in the next couple years about 1 in 3 locations are going to close permanently. Now, some people, I've talked to a restaurateur who is based in California, and he said, after 2008, 2009 recession, they were projecting, the California Restaurant Association was projecting like 40% of the restaurants to close permanently, and it wasn't even half of that. So that, there will be definitely a large amount of permanent closures, but is it going to be 1 in 3? We'll see if that'll happen. I don't know if Duncan, have anything to add?
Yeah, I do. The permanent closures is kind of funky, right? Because you'll have an operator leave a location, but then a new operator come in. So I think you're going to see a lot of new restaurants start up. In fact, I understand that's happening now, that a lot of new business formation is in restaurants. As erstwhile operators went out of business, now they're forming a new co and getting back into it again. But thinking about post-COVID trends in the restaurant industry, a lot of it is going to be the same. We mentioned too much square footage. People are going to continue to try to reduce their footprints, but et cetera, et cetera. But what COVID's done is it's accelerated many things. It's accelerated the third-party delivery. And because people needed to have it in order to survive, it's penetrated now not just the millennials, but the Gen X, and then, God forbid, the baby boomers are now taking home delivery, and they're doing, a lot of things now because they had to adapt and adopt tech in order to physically survive. They had to get into it. So now they're much more amenable to getting delivery and ordering online. Delivery and ordering online sort of go together. So that trend's going to be with us, I think, for a long time. I think you're going to be seeing increased pressure and continued pressure on dine-in and continued pressure to reduce restaurant footprints. And guests see the value in delivery now, and they're willing to pay for it. So you're going to see a continued migration from free delivery to a premium for delivery. So both the surcharge on third party, but then also baked into menu prices. At the chains that we're involved in, we do not pay third-party delivery fees. It's added on by the delivery provider. So we have our own website, and we're trying to drive people to our own website. We have our own delivery drivers in many cases, most locations. And consumers don't really care for Uber, et cetera. They'd rather actually go to the restaurant website and order directly. They think they're getting a better deal. And then, of course, also what we're trying to do is drive people to carry out, because it's a lesser cost, but it's a better quality experience for the customer because it's hotter and fresher. They take advantage of that themselves. We're going to see operational expenses that I mentioned continuing. I think that the cleanliness thing is going to continue on for a long time. I don't know if it ever goes away. So that sort of expense is going to keep on going. What's also happened to us, and what I've heard about with other people, is that COVID has forced sort of new modes of operation in the restaurant itself. You had to make do with less labor. Social distancing required you to actually have people that couldn't work next to each other. So you had to implement new procedures and policies at the actual restaurant. And so you also were worried about cost. You had to reduce your labor. It was sort of like a necessity is the mother of invention kind of saying that we were driven to it. We experimented with it. We were successful with it. And we're going to continue with that to reduce labor costs. Post-COVID emergency. Even when we reopen dine-in, we're going to be doing it without adding workers. So I think that I think is a pretty interesting outcome from it. And I think with that too, you're going to see increased competition, continuing on price and cost. And so I think that sort of a lot of the things that were happening prior to COVID are going to continue on, but COVID has changed things and accelerated things. And long and short, too, is that if you've survived COVID and made it through, you're likely going to be a viable competitor going forward.
Okay. All right. Yeah, just turning the page for Colin, looking at the trends post-COVID in the 3 to 5 year space, kind of look at our crystal ball.
Yeah, that crystal ball. So, these are kind of our best guesses of what are going to be the major trends, further than 2 years out. So kind of years 3 through 5. Lot of industry analyst reports you see are saying, hey, there's going to be less competition because of all the permanent restaurant closures. But as Duncan mentioned, and I've heard from a couple other institutions, that they are seeing some of the new business license data where restaurants is the one top 2 or 3 new businesses that are getting opened up right now, which kind of makes sense because it's probably they're getting good deals on rent. They're probably getting really good deals on kitchen equipment. So we'll see if there really is less competition in 3 years or greater. And that we've kind of ignored high-end or polished casual restaurants. There's still going to be a demand for those, but I think they're going to really have to be on their food game and also offer an experience for customers. So they've got to have the ambiance, they've got to have an experience that you can get, but likely not at a big chain. So that's just one thing we see. How about you, Dan?
Well, I think the thing that I see is that convenience is such a big deal right now in food. And it was a big deal before COVID. You talked before, Colin, about the millennials, that it was driven a lot by the millennial behavior. And I think now with COVID, at least it's kind of a top end and bottom end, right? The millennials, the relatively young people, are comfortable and always been comfortable with that. And the people that are in the 78 age group, they're not real keen on going to a sit-down restaurant because they're obviously more prone to have a serious COVID event that could kill them. So I think you're going to see the whole issue of convenience become a bigger and bigger deal. And the people that benefit primarily from that are the quick serve people and the fast casual people. So I think you're going to see that they eat market share during this period of time. And I want to comment on this issue of restaurants opening. And I don't know what the percentage of restaurants across the country it's going to close. I saw the same stats as you, Colin, that it'd be 30, 35%. I don't think it'll be that large, but it could be 20 or 25%. Restaurants, much like retail in this country, if you do any statistics compared to other Western countries, European countries primarily, we have way more restaurants per capita and way more retail than any other country. So that tells me we're over-restauranted. So a shakeout is probably a good thing. As I said in one presentation, I always knew there was a third too many restaurants. What I didn't know is they die within the same year, which I think is basically what's happened. I do think you're going to see a good deal of them come back, but I don't think it's going to be 2021 or 2022 that somebody opens up 10,000 restaurants one at a time. This is going to be a 5-year, 7-year, 8-year climb. For one thing, those landlords are going to be very skeptical of financing a shoestring restaurant operation. And the barriers to entry in restaurants, it doesn't take much if you buy a restaurant as is or close to as is to refurbish it. It doesn't take much to put food and drink in there. It takes a little bit of dollars to hire the employees because you got to suffer through a couple of weeks of payroll before you get hopefully to break even. But the big risk you have is you probably got to sign a 5 or 10-year lease. And oftentimes there's a personal guarantee associated with that. So even though landlords are eager beaver to get people in those spaces, they're not eager beaver to have another non-paying tenant that they takes them a year to evict because of COVID. So I hear you that there's restaurants are opening up. They've always opened up restaurants. Restaurants and bars are like cool things to own. Hey, I own a bar. Come to my bar. Okay. You make any money? No, but come to my bar. So anyway, those are my thoughts, Colin.
Yep.
Hey, so talking about technological innovation and ghost kitchens and virtual brands, ghost kitchens are sort of a funky animal. It's kind of hard to make money as a ghost kitchen because of some of the like a lot of these things are set up as like little cooperatives that there's a real estate owner and they're charging a fee to use their kitchens. And you got to have a pretty large amount of turnover in order to make those things viable.
Hey, Duncan, could you define what a ghost kitchen is? Some of the listeners may not know what that term is.
Ghost kitchen, basically, it's a back off. It's the back end of a restaurant. It's a restaurant without any place for dining in. There's no cashier. There's no front window space. There's no entry point on the street. It's basically delivery drivers coming in and out of that location. It could be sited in a warehouse. It could be sited in the back of an existing restaurant. There's a lot of different places it can be. And what we've experimented with it, and we're probably going to go forward with it. It makes sense in sort of dense urban areas where there's a high density of potential customers taking delivery. It doesn't make sense out in the burbs necessarily because of the drive times involved. And it doesn't make sense, obviously out in the countryside. It would be only really an urban sort of experience. But I think you'll see more of it. I think you'll see it a lot too with these sort of pop-up businesses where it's a chef and a couple of assistants, and they've got an online presence and they're able to deliver this way. And the investment is low because the kitchen equipment is being provided by an investor. It's sort of a lease concept that you're occupying the space and operating out of. Automation, things like that. Yes, I sort of see that there's a tremendous amount of capital investment required. It's sort of like, what do you need an ordering kiosk for if you've got a smartphone? I don't know that that's going to really take off. I don't know if you've used them before. They sort of are unwieldy, but you could do it on your phone and it's just as fast getting to the cash register as an ordering kiosk. But I do see, sort of, menu like ordering at a table. I do see sort of QR codes being used in restaurants. I see a lot of that stuff being popular ongoing. I think the biggest innovation in technology, though, is marketing. I think that heretofore restaurants have been doing a lot of radio, TV, a lot of mail drops, even people walk in neighborhoods and hanging stuff on door handles to generate, market awareness. Now it's very much moving towards the digital medium, that it's not email so much, it's not text so much as the new things, though that's still very popular. You're seeing the usage of search, and if somebody Googles a request in their phone, restaurants near me, that restaurant pops up. It takes you to that restaurant's website, and you can do an order, get a delivery, all those sorts of things.
Duncan, do you think that's effective with anyone other than millennials, the older people?
Yes, because we're seeing it because of the Gen Xers and baby boomers now having to go online to order, to get delivery. They're now more comfortable with it. Also, historically we've asked people to do online ordering because we wanted their information, and so that we could, push ads to them via email or text. Now we're finding that search is very effective in supplanting any need for radio, TV advertising, and it's very local. So if somebody's driving through an area or somebody that lives locally, they can get information very quickly, and it's high quality information, and it takes them directly to the ordering point, which is also very important. So I see that really taking over, and I think that COVID pushed that a lot faster than otherwise was taking place.
I did see a question pop up from participants on whether would you expect to see like DoorDash or Uber Eats, acquire restaurant chains to do some kind of vertical integration play? What do you think, Duncan?
I don't know. I think that they're making a pretty good margin without a lot of work.
Yeah.
It's hard to operate a restaurant and restaurant chain. I can see them doing it because they've got tremendous amounts of capital and they can do things like that. But boy, just think about the amount of they're taking as much or more margin out of a restaurant than the restaurant business is in many cases. So I don't know why they'd want to get into it, because it's a tough business. And but I don't know. I can't predict, and they've got lots of capital and they're smarter than me.
Is that the definition of being smart, having a lot of capital?
Capital. I mean, you can define something forever and ever. You look like a genius.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess.
Okay, thanks, guys. Let's take a look at the consultant's playbook and what we can do in the short run to improve financial results. Colin.
Yep. So, the first thing we do when we get engaged by a restaurant chain is prepare a four-wall analysis, and that's really preparing a database of all the restaurant locations and preparing, the financials by store location and determining quickly, which restaurants, should be closed. And we've, in every case we've been in, management's really resistant to close a location because, they've been trying to turn this location around for 3 years, and they think it's going to turn the corner soon. Or there was just a change of a manager, it'll come back. And sometimes it's really just, they want to keep a bigger platform and are not really focused on what can we do right now to improve cash flow. And then, the other thing you have to do right away is start identifying above market leases and trying to get those renegotiated with landlords. Because like Dan mentioned earlier, it's a lease by lease activity. There's very few, cases where you have one landlord that's got a large percentage of the stores. It's usually, onesies or twosies. And then franchisors also can be a difficult thing to negotiate, particularly since they've got a lot of leverage over franchisees as far as, if they've defaulted a contract or, potentially making it more difficult for the franchisee to close stores. So that's one thing you want to jump on. And, when you're renegotiating leases, you want to try to keep it below, 8% of sales and ideally closer to 6%. Again, there's some variability between geographies and urban and rural, but those are kind of the rule of thumbs that we jump into right away.
Yeah, the problem though is that, there's a landlord market out there. And so I like the percentages, but it can be exceedingly difficult to get a landlord to go there, especially if they're in a good location. Because even today with COVID, what we found is that well-located restaurants are commanding pretty good prices. So, good luck.
Yeah, definitely agreed. And but I think in the lesser locations or the suburbs or rural locations, we've had clients that have found success in getting some discounts, deferring a lot, because a lot of landlords, now the window's open for some of those lesser locations. The landlords know that there's a lot of potentially empty restaurant locations, and they're willing to deal.
Yeah, I think if you're able to demonstrate to the landlord that they have no option but to negotiate, you'll have a lot of leverage. As long as the landlord feels they have an option, they're going to be very difficult to deal with. When we acquired Papagino's and D'Angelo's, we credit bid debt and took it through BK, and it was exceedingly difficult to wrest any things out. Of course, that was pre-COVID, but again, I think it's still the same when in trying to look at new leases where there's been a restaurant in that location and it's an ideal location. We've been in pretty stiff competition.
Yeah, if I could chime in on this whole restaurant location thing. Anytime you're talking about real estate, it's the old location, right?
Yeah.
So if you got a restaurant on Michigan Avenue, there's a large, what do you call it? It doesn't matter. Anyway, a large restaurant. I think it's I can't think of the name of the restaurant. Doesn't matter. Michigan Avenue, I mean, they'll be able to repurpose that restaurant either to another brand, another chain, or to something else rather easily. If it's sitting in Fargo, North Dakota, outside of downtown, maybe not so. So it's really about location. But most landlords, the thing with landlords is you got different types of landlords, right? Some landlords are sophisticated, major owners of property, and they're going to deal with this. They're going to be difficult to deal with. Other people are just ma and pa's or small investments. Sometimes you got to REIT sometimes don't make any decisions at all. So it's kind of a location by location issue. But like anything else in our world, you got to assess your leverage, assess what the counterparty's alternatives are. And frankly, this is one of those things I think in negotiating either with the franchisor, probably more so than the landlords, it's incredibly difficult for a franchisee to negotiate with a franchisor. You really need somebody stuck in the middle of that transaction because they got to live with the guy, the franchisor when this ends. And if terse words are exchanged and bad feelings are bad and relationships are damaged, really hard to mend that. where consultants kind of come in and out and, you know.
Oh yeah, consultants are great on doing this hard stuff because, you know, all the bad feelings go away with the consultant. And
Exactly. I'm glad that prick's no longer working for you. Exactly.
Maybe, Kay, I know when we talked earlier, you had some experience kind of on the franchisor side. Can you add any comments?
Franchisors control. And I guess in my experience, if the franchisor wants you to survive, they'll work with you and they'll help you survive, although they'll try to stick it to the lender in the interim. If a franchisor does not want you to survive, you're toast. Your chances of being able to work through those bad feelings, I think it was Dan that was saying, are almost impossible. And so a franchisor is somebody you usually need to keep on your good side in whatever way that you can.
Kay, can you explain the importance of keeping a franchise agreement in a non-termination state if you know, relative
Absolutely.
to filing bankruptcy?
Right. If one of the important considerations for both leases and franchise agreements is if you allow those to be terminated under whatever would apply under the agreements and at least for leases under state law, a bankruptcy isn't going to help you. If you walk into a bankruptcy case with a terminated franchise agreement or a terminated leases, there is no way to revive it unless, again, the franchisor wants to be able to use the bankruptcy for a sale process or otherwise. But again, they generally in their franchise agreements have rights of first refusal, and there's all kinds of problems with franchisors in bankruptcy. There is a split of authority in the circuits as to whether a franchise agreement can even be assumed, not assumed and assigned, but even be assumed if the franchisor does not agree.
Maybe Kay, could you also, this might be a good time to kind of chat about the pros and cons of doing a Chapter 11.
Sure. I mean, a Chapter 11 will give you some breathing space. You do have the automatic stay. You do have the ability to reject non-residential real property leases and executory contracts. You may be able to restructure the debt. You can use the 363 sale process to sell assets free and clear, which are generally attractive to potential buyers. Some of the cons are Chapter 11 is a very expensive process, and you have to have cash to survive in Chapter 11. Although that may seem counterintuitive, you have to have cash. So if you can't live on your cash collateral and you really can't find anybody who's going to finance it, a bankruptcy is not going to help you. Again, you can't revive agreements if they've already been terminated. You do have the assignment issues with franchisors. You also are creating a forum for certain types of litigation because in a bankruptcy case, there are certain causes of action given to the estate, which may or may not be helpful to the equity or the owners of the business. You also have issues like, and this was sort of with the vendor issues, that franchisors generally have vendors that they require their franchisees to buy the product. In the what I would call fast food, McClary, MBM, and they usually take a security interest, a purchase money security interest in the goods. So if you get upside down with that vendor, a bankruptcy is going to be difficult there as well because you have to buy from that vendor. You have to cure the default. And if you can't, then you're going to be in breach of your franchise agreement. So they're not always the easiest to lever. Also, in a bankruptcy proceeding or any proceeding, restaurants generally are buying fresh produce. And there is a federal statute, the Perishable Agricultural Commodities Act, PACA, which imposes a federal statutory lien or a trust on the proceeds from the sale of the goods covered under PACA. There's no UCC filings. A lot of people refer this to as a silent lien. It primes everyone, and it's automatically created if you have some magic language on your invoice that's required by the statute. So a bankruptcy is not going to really help you with those types of vendors either. Whether you file, as soon as there's any indication of any financial trouble, You absolutely need to get restructuring professionals on board immediately. The longer you wait, the worse the scenario, and the least likely that a bankruptcy, to the extent it could or can be helpful, will be helpful. So you always need to get restructuring, and it's difficult because to some degree, and I think Dan alluded to this, to some degree there's always blinders on. You know, we're going to be able to do this. We're going to be able to pull it out. We don't need that kind of help. But you absolutely need restructuring professionals sooner rather than later, even if you don't file. But if you're going to file, you can get to a situation where the filing will not be of any benefit.
You know, Kay, there was a question, and maybe this for other on the panel too, but there's a question if anybody had any experience with Chapter 5 in this sector. I don't, but I don't know if you have, Kay.
No, I have not had that, but I think the Congress just extended the Chapter 5. So the debt limit for another year is now $7.5 million. And I don't remember what it was before the extension through COVID. So I do think we're going to see more and more of it. I have heard people on panels discuss it and had great success stories with it about how it was streamlined. There's no committee. It makes it less expensive. It allows an owner to keep their equity without violating the absolute priority rule. I just haven't had any personal experience with it.
Just so everyone realizes, Chapter 5 is a small company bankruptcy rule that you have to have total debts of less than a certain parameter. In this case, that I think the rule was temporarily increased to 7.5 million as part of the COVID bill. I think before it was, I don't know if it was 3.5 or 5 million, but I've never been in a Chapter 5, but I know people that have, and it's a wonderful. It's as Kay pointed out, no absolute priority rule, no committee. There's a trustee appointed to overlook the case. It's supposed to be fast and quick, but secured lenders probably don't like it very much. But otherwise, it works pretty good, I think. There was another question too, wasn't there, on buffets? I think.
Yes.
About whether buffets are dead or not. Colin, what do you think about that? Is the buffet business dead?
I think, you know, as Duncan mentioned, the cleanliness part is going to be with us for a long time. And I just think that's going to be something that's going to affect people's willingness to do a buffet, because you are close quarters, you are going down a line, getting food out of the same, you know, pot or container that other people are. I think it's going to be harder for people to come back to that sector. That's just my take.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I don't think that regulation is going to drive it. I don't know that that COVID is transmitted by surface contact. I don't think that's actually borne fruit as we see. It's more airborne, but it's really about the customer confidence with that particular method of delivery of the food. And a lot of people like it. It's a cheap way to just, to get the food out, but unless people are confident that it's not going to give them a problem with COVID, I don't think you'll see them doing it that much. I think you'll see it come back after a while, I think is probably the easier way to say it.
Well, given that I'm always the most direct person in the group, I think buffets are dead. Do I think they'll likely come back in 5 years in some reincarnation? Yeah, but I think every buffet guy is dead. That's my opinion.
Currently, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think they'll go out of business. I don't think they'll be able to survive, Duncan. I think
not 5 years.
The runway to back to break even is too long, in my honorable opinion.
Yeah. So, I mean, what they have to do is what the other folks in the restaurant trade have done is that they've gotten carry out and delivery ramped up, got third party delivery to service them, and they established an online presence and went to town that way. So.
Yep. Exactly.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, guys. We have one more slide to wrap up. Taking a look at some complexities relating to the workout and the restructurings. Colin, any thoughts on the real estate side?
Yeah. So, it's we've done analysis on some partial liquidations in our engagements, and particularly during COVID. Liquidating a restaurant, just a generic casual restaurant, is very difficult to be able to make much money out of doing that. Obviously, right now, kitchen equipment prices are significantly decreased because of the oversupply and availability of them. A lot of, obviously there will be auctioneer commissions. Some auctioneers will keep the equipment and the furniture and fixtures in the store, but then you have to continue to pay rent. Some auctioneers want you to bring it to a centralized location, and then you'll have transportation, you'll have storage, you potentially may have damage as that equipment is being taken out of the restaurant. And the times we've done the kind of deep dive analysis, it's break even, or you could even lose money trying to liquidate the furniture, fixtures, and equipment of a restaurant.
Yeah, I think it often pays just to simply abandon the site.
Yeah.
Just leave everything as is. Move the food out and make sure that's cleaned up, but the rest of it, just abandon it.
Yeah. And we had one restaurant chain where they didn't standardize the equipment between location. And so you had a lot of different size refrigerators. You had a lot of different size grills to fit the different restaurant footprints. And it was just, it was a mishmash of equipment, and it was tough finding anybody interested in a wide array of equipment like that. So, some of the other things we've seen, the biggest thing I think we have seen that in workouts for restaurants when they're going through a sale, either a out of court or a 363 sale, is the working capital deficit. If you think about the balance sheet of a restaurant chain, they have little cash, they have credit card receivables for a couple days worth. Inventory is usually a quick turn, but then if you look at the current liabilities of a restaurant chain, you're looking at accrued payroll, accrued benefits, accrued vacation. You've got payables to the food line or the broadline vendors, and whenever a buyer comes in, he's not taking those liabilities, so you have to take a portion of the proceeds to cover those liabilities at closing. And sometimes that has been almost 100% of the proceeds of selling a restaurant chain in the current kind of COVID environment with very low multiples and cash flow. And that was something that was new to a workout sale of a restaurant chain in the COVID era versus before then.
Well, I think it's the same as any distressed restaurant transaction. I mean, that's part of purchase price when you're evaluating the deal. Mm-hmm. Understand working capital and your offer, with or without working capital should be calibrated as such. It's in many ways with some of these, if the location is good, you can put any restaurant in there. So, that's probably in some cases, that's really where the sale is the location. The other thing that was striking me is that, reason that restaurants can be so easily started up is because of the negative working capital issue, right?
Yep.
So that's why you see them start up and die quick. But
I want to make sure real quickly that the point that Colin was making, I'm going to reemphasize it in a little different manner. Most of us work in and around insolvency and bankruptcy. And so the normal situation in a bankruptcy is that your trade payables are almost all left behind. Somebody concocted this crap about critical vendors 20 years ago, and the courts believe it. Now we process these critical vendor motions. I wrote an article for the ABI 20 years ago and said that was all BS, and I still believe it, but that's what you do these days. But you still leave behind in most bankruptcies the majority of the trade creditors. That ain't the case in restaurants. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, this broadline vendor, which distributes to every one of your restaurants, by and large, they're almost impossible to replace in the short term. They may be dictated by your franchisor, or just they've got their claws into you. So you basically got to assume their contract and cure their deficiency. And that's most of your payables. And then as Kay said, you got PACA, any fresh produce. And then in many cases, you got liquor. You're not stiffing the liquor guy, which is often a government agency. So unlike any other bankruptcy that I can think of, you pretty much have to make good that current liability side of that balance sheet. I don't know if there's another industry that's the case. And it comes as a stunner to many cases to lenders, which is, what do you mean we got to pay the trade? You got to pay the trade if you're going to try to sell the business, because the buyer's not going to operate the business with the broadliner not delivering products to them. They're just not going to, or the liquor guy not delivering to them. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah, it's true. And you're right, Dan, because it's as a distressed investor, it really limits, your preference to buy a business that is suffering, because if it's been going down the tubes for a long time, it may have negotiated better payment terms with its food vendor. And then, if you sort of step in, you got to pay those guys off, as you mentioned, and it is actually sometimes more than purchase price or the value of the brand even. So
Exactly.
Makes it tough.
Yeah, and in my experience, the vendors that you're dealing with here have gotten smart, and so they are filing a purchase money security interest. So not only do they have to be taken care of because it's an executory contract, but they have to be taken care of because they're priming the lender.
Yeah, they've got a lien. Yeah, I hear you.
But Dan was right too, is that they have amazing leverage over you, because you're getting food deliveries 3 times a week, and you run out of food immediately if they don't deliver to you. So,
exactly. Hey, Mike, we had 2 more questions. I don't know if you want to quickly jump on those before we bail out.
Yeah, I just see one here. The question is, what do you think happens to the buffet concept? Oh, no, we already covered that.
Yeah, somebody asked about cruise ships, whether or not buffets, how does that affect cruise ships? I'll jump in with a quick answer. I actually think it doesn't affect cruise ships hardly at all. I think the expectation of people that go on the cruise ships is they eat like crazy. And I think they will generally overlook that. If they book the cruise, that's just part of what they're going to accept in my mind. Mike, the other one that dropped off is, will we make the slides available? And yeah, sure. Email Mike and we'll make the slides available to whoever would like to get a copy of the slides.
Hey, Dan, one corollary to the cruise ship thing, some of them are talking about requiring vaccinations before any passenger gets on ship, and all their crew are going to be vaccinated as well. So I think, again, it goes back to the safety concept and the confidence concept that the customer has with respect to whether or not it's safe to use the buffet or not.
Absolutely, man.
Okay, great. So any other thoughts from the panelists? Anything we want to cover? I think we hit all the comments we wanted to. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today, and I'll turn it over to Amanda for the networking portion.